are just joining us on Facebook Live, I'm Lauren from RDU on Stage. And I am with Ken Smith, who probably needs no introduction because we're all glued to our television sets right now. But you are an anchor and reporter for WRAL, and you are with your lovely wife, Amanda, who I think of our heroes because you're a teacher. Now that my children have been home for the last X number of however this long has been, it's yeah, the teachers are the unsung heroes now. I think we're all feeling.
And you've had a graduation too, so that's awesome.
We had a graduation. It's bittersweet. It's I think for all the graduates, it's a very bittersweet time because their senior year certainly not what they thought it was going to be. But she's happy, so I'm happy.
Lauren, I got to tell you, 4 years ago tonight, I actually proposed to her on the stage at DPAC after the Broadway show If Then. Yeah. So
Oh
this
my
is a do this interview.
Oh my gosh, this is like your engagement anniversary. Amanda, did you
Yes.
he was going to propose? Like, why did you think you were going on the stage?
Well, here's the thing. I had worked it out with Deepak weeks in advance. And I knew I wanted to do something theater related when I proposed, but I just didn't know what. And then this opportunity came up to support the charity for Broadway Cares. And in exchange for doing that, you're welcome to come on stage. The cast will join you afterwards. And there were some word cues that I was given. Once I heard that word cue, dropped on my knees, boom, and popped the question.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well, and thank
great.
goodness you said yes.
Exactly, because one of my closest buddies was actually shooting the video. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, that's it, yeah. But it was
I love
just
that story so much, and I want to talk about I know you obviously from the news, but there's been more nights than not that you and I've been standing by the stage door together, the two of you, to get your program signed at DPAC and to get your post.
absolutely. Plus,
So yeah, I really do want to talk about the theater, but Ken, I want to talk um it's crazy news cycle right
it really is.
now. Um and I want to talk about your career and broadcasting. Why news? You grew up in St. Thomas, US Virgin Islands.
Yeah, I did. And interestingly enough, I was actually born in the British Virgin Islands on the island of Tortola. And my parents moved us to the US Virgin Islands when I was a little boy. And when we left the British Virgin Islands, I had no idea what a television was. We only had radio. Knew. So when we came to the United States and came to St. Thomas, I saw a television, an actual television set for the very first time. And we were immigrants, so we were actually living with this elderly lady. In exchange, my mom would take care of her, and she was connected with our family in some way. But I remember as a kid seeing this little square box with a glass in the corner of the living room. She never turned it on, so I just thought it was a radio, a really cool looking radio with a glass face. And the first thing I ever saw on television was a newscast. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, the very first thing, and I'll never forget it. It was I came home from school late one day. My mom and I had something going on at school, and I remember walking in, and the news had exactly started, the local news, and I remember just standing there being completely because again, I'm thinking this is a radio, but really it's not. It's what people call a television. And it was the most incredible thing. And I remember thinking, wow, how cool is that? I want to do that. But I didn't really give it a second thought. I just, And when I got older, and of course, you have to have that conversation with your guidance counselor. What do you want to do with your life? And I remembered being 6 years old and I told her, I want to be a TV reporter. And she said something that made all the difference in the world because you remember it's the St. Thomas. They know attorneys, doctors, teachers, government, working in tourism. And she turned to me and she said, "You can do that." And it made all the difference in the world for me because at the time I thought, I didn't even believe I could do it, but I knew in my mind what I wanted to do with my life was working broadcasting in some capacity. And the rest.
For me, I think the moment knew I wanted to be a journalist was sadly when the Challenger disaster happened, and I
Oh,
remember
wow.
watching it and being glued to the TV and thinking, I want to be there to be able to tell those stories. I want to tell those stories.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, I know on your WRAL page, it says that one of your most memorable assignments was traveling and being embedded with the Fort Bragg troops overseas.
Yes.
Can you
And I've
talk
had an
about
opportunity. Yeah, I've had an opportunity to do that several times. And I think one of the most memorable ones was traveling to Iraq before the regime fell.
that?
And we actually set up in Kuwait City. And we were there for several weeks before we were given the word to move out because we were going to go from Kuwait City all the way north to Mosul, Iraq.
Mm.
And I remember when we were in Kuwait City, even before we did that, we were on watch because we knew that the invasion was coming at some point. And the way it works, which was interesting to me, I didn't even know that the US government actually coordinated with the networks behind closed doors to let us know what was happening. So it was a situation where the networks will communicate with the military, the US military, Washington, D.C., and they kept us apprised of what the movements were so we could be ready to broadcast the moment it happened. And I didn't know that sort of thing went on. I thought, we all stayed in our lanes. But in this situation, it was the U.S. government working closely with the networks. So we knew exactly when the invasion was going to happen. And I remember staying up all night because when you're in Kuwait City, I think you're 10, 12 hours ahead. And we ended up staying up that night. And I think it was 3 a.m. our time locally in Kuwait City when the bombs started falling in Iraq. And we knew that. And it was so intriguing.
Amanda, are you sitting at home when these things happen? Because he said you did this several times, and
I
freaking
know.
out as you're watching
Yeah.
the news unfold.
No, luckily he did that before we met because I'm pretty sure I would have put the kibosh on that really quickly. But he likes the that it's not a traditional desk job and he likes to tell the stories. So he'll be the person that signs up to go to the coast to cover hurricanes, or he'll sign up to when there's emergency evacuations from cities, but he signs up to be down there on the front lines. And I even heard from his photographer one time that they had to sign a waiver because since it was a mandatory evacuation, that if they couldn't get to a hospital or something happened, that they couldn't sue. And I heard this after the fact. So he
Yeah,
loves getting out there. He likes that anchor and reporter job because he likes being in the
best of
studio,
both worlds.
but he likes getting out and telling the stories of the people. He likes being in the community. And
Yeah.
so
And I think the last big deployment that I went on was a couple of years before I met her. We went to Afghanistan again with Fort Bragg troops, and I remember there were a couple of nights when it got real, very real, to the point where um, I remember a sergeant coming into where we were sleeping. He says, "Oh, you guys got to get up. You got to go to the bunker." And I remember that night we stayed in the bunker for like maybe 2 hours until the all clear was given. And it was, my photographer and I looked at each other and we thought, yeah, this is real. This is what's really happening, because we were in the green zone in Bagram Air Force Base, and that's fortified. I mean, you're surrounded, but it doesn't stop missiles from coming over the wall. And that's exactly what happened to another camp about an hour south of where we were. The missiles came raining in, and several people died at that camp. So we knew that this was something not to be taken lightly. We never traveled in vehicles. We always flew wherever we went. We were always in Blackhawks, and uh, armed Blackhawks. So there was always a gunner on each side where we were flying. There was only one time we got a little nervous when the helicopter pilot had to do some evasive action, but he wasn't sure what it was. But to be on the safe side, he did it. Um, I was very happy to get back on the ground after that flight, because when we visited different camps in Afghanistan, the only way we could do that was flying, and you had to be on the ready because a lot of what was happening was ground to air attacks. So we had to be careful about
Did you find, I was trying to explain this to somebody a few weeks ago. As a journalist, very early on in my career, I was a street reporter for a radio news organization in Miami, Florida. And I would get sent to cover these stories, and I wouldn't think about my safety. I was chasing the story. And it wasn't until I would get home and see the story I was covering on the news that I would realize that my life was in danger. Because for me, it was an adrenaline rush. It was
that. Absolutely.
literally chasing the story. Do you find that?
Absolutely. Like Amanda was just saying, that's why I signed up for these assignments, because this is why you become a journalist, because you want to be on the front lines telling those stories. I remember well when they had those riots and protests in Charlotte, I think 3 or 4 years ago. I think it was over some shooting that was racially sensitive. And my photographer and I were in the middle of the street when tear gas started, when the cops shot off some tear gas. um, Next thing you know, we heard gunfire, and I distinctly remember my eyes burning, my nose running. It felt like my skin was on fire. Um, but you're in the middle of, and I think, well, I was on Facebook Live. I was on Facebook Live when that happened, and maybe just a short distance away from me, somebody got shot in front of the Omni Hotel in Charlotte, and you're right there. But that's when you're in the middle of it, you're not thinking about the danger. You're really thinking about telling the story and making sure viewers know what's going on, and real, because as journalists, we're the eyes and ears for our viewers. And when you're in a situation like that, you, like you said, you don't really recognize the danger until afterwards. Fortunately, I have an Emmy for that coverage. So
Hey,
we're
off.
Hey,
good. Yes, exactly.
Amanda, is there ever a time when he's out covering a hurricane or a natural disaster or some kind of story where he's on the street reporting that you just can't watch because you just can't do it?
yeah, there's been times And then sometimes I'll have people, they'll say, well, where is he? And I'll say, turn the TV on. You'll find out when I do. Because, I mean, he covered the flooding in New Bern last year between all the hurricanes. And he was out in a kayak. And he got out and it was waist deep. And it's just, I couldn't fathom that happening to me or friends. And we have family and friends that live in New Bern and on the coast. And it's hard to really picture it until you see it. Yeah. And then he went down between Irma and Maria 2 years ago to the islands, and his parents, we couldn't get in contact with them for days, and they were without power for over 3 months. Yeah. And they didn't have a generator, and they didn't want one. They said that they were fine, but they're just such resilient people. And his aunt in Tortola, they lost the roof of their house in the first hurricane, and then it flooded in the second, and then they lost their entire house. And so she just said, well, we're alive. That's what matters. Yeah. And she and her husband were both teachers, and they had thousands of books. And so me as a teacher, I was just going, the book, but it's all material things. They said, we're alive. Yeah. And so for me, there, like you asked, there are times that I'm just like, okay, well, you can tell me about it when you get home, because then I know you're safe because you're home with me.
Exactly. And that meant so much to me to be able to go down to St. Thomas between Irma and Maria 2 or 3 years ago, because like she said, we could not get a hold of my parents. We had no idea what was going on, and this opportunity to travel once again with Fort Bragg troops heading down to St. Thomas to help with, it was actually a medical unit. And they were going to augment the hospital that was almost destroyed. Half the hospital was gone. So this military unit from Fort Bragg was going on to help. The opportunity came up, and I said, yeah, of course, let's do this. And so I was able to go down, see some of my old neighborhoods, see my parents, was able to interview my mom, which meant so much to me to be able to interview my mom. And just to know that they were safe made all the difference in the world. And this was after Irma. So Maria was bearing down on the islands. And the military turned to us and they said, all right, here's the deal. If you guys are going to stay with us, we're going to board a Navy ship and go out into the ocean to wait out the hurricane. And I looked at my photographer, Richard Atkins, and we were like, we are not getting on a ship during a hurricane. No, that's not happening. So somehow we were able to, there was an Air Force crew getting ready to come back to the mainland. And we said, we got to figure out a way to get on that flight. So we ended up getting on the flight out of St. Thomas and catching the last flight out of Puerto Rico to Boston before the airport shut down and Maria hit like 2 days later.
Wow.
Incredible. Incredible.
This week especially has been a very upsetting news cycle for so many people. I know that your news philosophy is that the news is about people. Are there some stories, like you're talking about going to cover the hurricane or what's happening in the news this week, that are just more difficult to cover than others and maintain that objectivity?
It is, and I'm glad you brought that up because it brings back this story so vividly, and it's military related. This young man was killed in action, and he was supposed to come home like a week before he got killed. And his mom wanted to make sure that he came home. So the neighborhood formed a gauntlet of flags and the hearse carrying the soldier came down the street, pulled up in front of his mom's house. She came out, greeted her son in the casket. I was boohooing. It was, at that point, I was just human. I knew I was there to cover a story, and I was doing that. But at some point, sometimes as a journalist, you're human, and what you're seeing affects you. And both my photographer and I mean, I was crying more than he was, but I couldn't hold it. I tried, but I couldn't hold it. And it's interesting that the people around me didn't ridicule me for that. You know,
Mhm.
I thought, oh, I'm losing my objectivity and I should do better. And no, they were so gracious and so kind and recognized the brevity of the moment and how emotionally intense that was to see a mom greeting her young military son in a casket, um, because she wanted to fulfill his dream of coming back home. And that's how he
Mhm.
came back home. It was uh,
As a
heartbreaking.
that breaks my heart, probably yours too.
Absolutely
Oh my God.
heartbreaking. And you know, I think that incident in and of itself made me realize that at some point as a journalist, it's okay to be human. Um, uh, and this is a lot different than giving your opinion. Giving your opinion, it's not something that I recommend for a journalist at all, depending on the kind of show you're on. You've got to always maintain your objectivity. But by the same token, it's okay to be human. It's okay to show that emotion that because these are people, these are people's lives, and these are families being torn apart, or whatever the case may be. I always tell young students, um, always treat people the way you'd like somebody to treat your family. Whenever you have an opportunity to speak to a family who's grieving, a family who's been through a devastating situation like a tornado, lost everything, um, always think about when you go up to that door, how would you want a reporter to greet your family in a situation like that? I'll never forget this story. I was covering a deputy. He got shot and killed right in his neighborhood. He came home one day and he saw this car in an empty lot. So he just went to check it out and see what the problem was. Next thing you know, there's two young guys in there. They got spooked, pulled a rifle, shot the deputy, died like less than a mile from his house. So that afternoon, of course, the media converged on the neighborhood, and several of my colleagues and I were standing outside a few doors down from where the widow lived. And to our surprise, she actually came out and said hello to us. And I remember saying to her, "We're so sorry that we have to be here. Um, Please accept our deepest sympathy and condolences for the loss of your husband. Is there anything you'd like to say right now?" And she's like, "I'm not ready to talk, but I know you guys have a job." She was so gracious. You guys have a job to do, and but I appreciate you giving my family some privacy. 2 years later, I was in a grocery store. Her brother comes up to me and she said, "My sister has never forgotten how you treated her the day her husband died." And I thought, I I vaguely remember it, and I vaguely remember what I said to her. And then it all came back to me when I walked away and I thought, oh yeah, I remember her coming out and I remember saying, expressing my sympathies and condolences. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. But for him, 2 years later, to see me in the grocery store and come up to me and talk about it, I thought, well, it means that the mentors who mentored me did something right. And I always like to pass that on.
One of the things I took very seriously when I was in journalism school was my ethics classes. Um, and that's what I feel like you're speaking on. And I had wonderful mentors too who taught me about facts and um, yes, we're there to entertain, we're telling
But
stories, we're sharing the news, but
mm,
we've got to be factual. And I don't
absolutely,
remember a time when there has been such an attack on news
yeah,
and facts.
yeah,
When I was growing up, we didn't have fake news.
Yeah, no, not at all. And that's why it's incumbent in all of us as journalists, not to first of all be um, driven to the point where you retaliate, because your best weapon is truth.
Mm.
When in the face of misinformation, untruths, as a journalist, when you check your facts, check it twice. That's your best retaliation to the whole charge of having fake news.
Yeah.
Tell the truth. And eventually, people recognize that. Look, you're not going to please everybody. There's staunch supporters of people promoting fake news and the whole 9 yards. But at the end of the day, as a journalist, you've got to look yourself in the mirror and recognize you have a job to do, and you have an obligation to your viewers to make sure there's truth and accuracy in your storytelling.
And integrity in
Oh
what we
yeah, absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
about integrity. Another story that hit kind of close to home for you is you reported about Amanda's cousin, Grant. I remember
Yes.
his name because that's my husband's name.
Oh, I love it.
um, who came back from London and was diagnosed with COVID. How is he doing? And when a story like this hits so close to home like that, does it make you concerned that we're not taking this thing seriously enough, or maybe we're taking it too seriously? I don't know.
You know what? The thing with recognizing that I had a family member with COVID-19, and because Amanda's first cousin, I know Grant, we've broken bread together, and I thought this is serious. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring him on was there was this misnomer among young people that they're invincible, and for me it was important to bring him on to tell his story, so other young people his age, because it's only what, 24,
Yeah.
24, 25. It was important for him, it was important for the audience to hear it from him, a 20 something dealing with it, because he had two perspectives, because he was in London when it started going crazy over there, and then he came back to the United States when it hit here as well. And as you heard from the interview, when he got back, he just wasn't feeling himself. He thought maybe it's because he was still working at a firm in London from home here in North Carolina. So he thought maybe it's the jet lag, maybe it's the time difference. His body just wasn't recovered. And then, the temperature started to rise, and, so he recognized that something was wrong. And to be able to have him on to tell his story meant a lot. You know, Initially I thought, do I want to bring him on because he's family? But then when I thought of, and I ran it by my news director and producer, and they're like, no, no, he brings a unique perspective to the table, and I think it helps that he's family,
Mhm.
because when people see that, hey, this is part of Ken's family, and he's talking to him, and that connection is made, and that was important.
I think so. I think it drives that home because so many of us may not know somebody, but when we, see somebody once removed from us, people feel they know you because you're in their homes every day, every night. So, um, I think that drives the story
Yeah,
home.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And I received so many comments from that story on Facebook, and I think people just appreciated the fact that he was telling his story,
Mm.
and it resonated with a lot of people.
So, Amanda, you are a self proclaimed theater gal, according to your social media bio. Were you a theater kid growing up?
A little bit. I grew up, like we were talking earlier, like Laurel at Raleigh Little Theater and doing a couple shows at Theater in the Park here and there. I majored in theater in undergrad, and then went on and got my master's in education. But I was always somebody that I loved the adrenaline rush of putting on a show. I did costumes for NCT as my senior project. Also like stage managed and stuff. I got to work with a Tony Award winner, George Merritt, at he had came and directed Children of Eden and flew in from New York, and I was going, gosh, like I'm in the room with he was in Jeff Van Hyde, and I had heard him on a CD, and now I'm working with him. And so it was to me, if I couldn't be on stage, I was somebody that was told no a lot. And so I was going, well, if I can't be up there, then I'm going to help make it happen. And if I can't help make it happen, I'm going to be in the audience. So to me, like being part of a show, it's just, I mean, as Hamilton says, you're in the room where it happens. And so that became me. If I couldn't be on the stage and I couldn't be in the production crew or running crew of a show, then I wanted to be in the audience. And some shows I've seen like 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I mean,
You know what we're talking about,
so
Lauren.
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, and sometimes a show just it gets your attention. And there's been a couple shows that like that. I've seen like Rent several times. I've seen tours. I've seen college productions. I mean, so and then there's other shows that a certain tour will come through, and I will say, I'm going to enter the lottery at DPAC every day. Will I win tickets?
Yeah, exactly.
I've done that too. So Ken, were you like my husband who, begrudgingly went to the theater, or did you like the theater when you guys started dating?
Oh, that was one of the things we had in common. I thoroughly enjoyed the theater. My first Broadway show, I was in college, was in New York visiting friends and family. And my cousin said, let's go to a matinee. And, we went down to Times Square, and A Chorus Line was my first Broadway show, and I've been hooked ever since. So over the years, I enjoyed the theater, but it really got kicked up a notch when I met her, and it became so much a part of our lives. So no, I was a willing participant and continue to be a willing participant in the theater, because it's such an incredible feeling being in the audience. And one of my greatest joys before the pandemic was being able to interview the actors when they came through. So incredible. One of my most memorable was the actors from Kinky Boots. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with them because we had seen the show a couple of nights before, and it was phenomenal.
NCT's Kinky Boots, or at the NCT?
Yeah. And then, of course, when Aladdin came to town, I had a chance to go backstage and interview some of the actors from that too, and it was just great.
And it was the stage manager too, because he kept asking about the magic carpet, but their contracted answer is it's Disney magic.
Yeah, they're not gonna. They would not give away any secrets.
So, it was actually, that magic carpet effect at DPAC was almost better than when I saw it in New York. It was so impressive.
Yeah.
DPAC. And there's so much at DPAC that is impressive. And North Carolina Theater, that production of Kinky Boots, that was, my business partner Kim and I were saying, it's a happy pill you didn't know you needed, because it was so joyous.
Yeah. And it's funny, we'd seen
well, I made him see when they did it in the theater, when they showed it for a weekend, the pre-recorded the London cast.
Yeah.
And so I bought tickets, and I said, oh, you really need to see this show, you're gonna love it. And
so good.
He left going like, oh yeah, I like this show. And it teaches you a lesson too.
So what was the first show you saw together?
I took him for his birthday to see at DPAC A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah,
But it's a good
exactly.
show.
I know.
It was nice. And the fact that we had that in common just, you know, made all the difference in the world for me. And so that worked out.
And I didn't think I really knew it at the time, but I had gotten, as a student, I had gotten tickets to DPAC, and then my parents eventually said they added on an extra ticket because they said it's not fun to go to shows by
Right.
yourself. But I really didn't mind. I'd drive 20 minutes in the car, listen to music, see a show, and drive 20 minutes back, and normally put in this show CD I had just seen to continue the party to drive home. And so then for his birthday, we hadn't been dating for very long, but I gave him tickets, and I don't know if he knew how big of a deal that was for me to give him a prize ticket to a show at DPAC.
I didn't at the time, actually.
Yeah.
I thought,
True
oh,
love right there.
I know. I was like, this will make or break the relationship right here.
because we met actually a week before you left for Baltimore to get your master's.
Yep.
Yeah.
10 days.
And I just remember, and I tell people this all the time. The first time I saw her, I knew my life was about to change immediately. No question. No question. It was a Coleman Race for the Cure, and Meredith had a tent set up next to WRAL. You were with your alumni folks.
Yeah.
And we were, of course, glad handing, giving out, souvenirs or whatever, free things. And she was just looking for freebies for her classroom when she came over to our tent. And the minute I looked up, I thought, I have to see her again. And it was, and I knew right there and then my life was about to change. And so I kid because initially I gave her my work cell phone number. And then when I realized, ooh, I really want to see her again. Then I called her and I texted you my personal number.
Yeah.
Says, let's play tennis. And the rest is history.
And Amanda, were you feeling the same way, or were you just like, who's the crazy news guy in the tent? Giving me his phone number.
Yeah.
I'm gonna watch ABC.
I was like, the longer I smile and talk to him, the more free things I can put in my bag.
Yeah. And the funny thing is,
Pencils, little pens.
other people wanted a picture with me, but I wanted a picture with her. And she kept saying, no, I'm good. I'm good. No. We gotta have a picture together. So she finally acquiesced and took a picture with me. But yeah, I was the one who wanted the picture. And everybody was in line trying to get a picture with me. I got a picture with her.
Oh,
Yeah.
so fun. I love that story. That's awesome. And so when you went so you're going to graduate school to get your master's, you guys kind of had this long distance relationship?
We did.
We did.
We did. And the thing is, I had said, I don't know when I said to myself, I'm not doing long distance relationships. I'm just not doing it. And then, of course, I met her. And I thought, ooh, I can't let this one get away.
No.
So we put a lot of miles on I-95 back and forth because she would come home for shows because she still was a season ticket holder.
Yeah, I wasn't giving up my season ticket.
Yeah, so she would. So I knew that we'd see each other. We wouldn't be apart longer than maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month, if that. So a lot of times we were seeing each other within 2 to 3 weeks of the last visit. Either she would come down here for shows, or I would go up for a weekend. But yeah, I made the decision like, oh yeah, we can't let this one go. So long distance it is.
I love that. So any other than proposing on the stage in DPAC, any other special show memories that stick out for you?
I think whenever I go see a show at DPAC, I always come away thinking, well, which one is still my favorite? Because it used to be Finding Neverland. What's my favorite? So every show I see with her is memorable for me. But then I think there's something special about some of these shows. And of course, I saw Dear Evan Hansen and there you go. But then my favorite lately is Come From Away. Oh my gosh. Love, love that show. Big
There's
fan.
something so special about that show.
Oh,
I That's one, Amanda, that I've seen multiple times, and I could
Yeah.
see it 100 times and just love it.
And
yeah.
that's when my friend, I was in grad school when I was at Ford, and my friend said, "Oh, I won. They had a free lottery for teachers, like to the second or third night that it was open." And so she said, "I'm gonna go see this 9/11 musical," and I said, "That sounds horrible." And I would never say that about a musical. And so she just described it so not very well. That was basically how she described it. Well, then she called afterwards and she was like, "You have to come down to DC. We're gonna go." And I think she saw it 5 times at Ford's.
Mm,
I went twice with her, and then we went up to DC or to New York and saw it too. So that's and then I've seen it at DPAC. Saw it twice when it was at
incredible.
DPAC.
Incredible.
But for me, Ken, and I don't know if it's the same for you guys. People ask me all the time, what is your favorite show? And it's a very hard question to
It
answer
really
And
is.
it,
because so many of my show experiences
Mm,
are tied into familial experiences. I've either seen it with my mother, or
mm,
I've seen it with my daughter, or I took my son to see it for the first time. And so I find that my best show memories are tied up with family memories. And so, I'll say to someone, "Oh, yeah, Peter Pan with Sandy Duncan, that's my favorite show," because my dad took me to see it. And
yeah.
Oh,
that was one of my first Broadway shows. So
wow.
it's very hard to say what your favorite show is. Do you feel the
It
same
really
way?
is. Yeah, it is because even though I'm a big fan of Come From Away, I can't, like you said, get away from the fact that my first Broadway show was a chorus
Yeah.
line, and it holds a very special place in my heart. Every time I have an opportunity to see that show, whether it's here in Raleigh or somewhere else, I have gotten, I've jumped at the chance to do it because it just holds a special place in your heart.
And there is nothing I once upon a time saw that show too in New York at Schubert Theater. That's where it
Yeah,
played.
yeah.
I have this small obsession with One Schubert Alley, which is the little souvenir shop behind the theater. That's where I used to collect all my collectibles,
Oh,
whenever
nice.
I go to New York. And
Yeah.
there's something very special about seeing a chorus line
Oh,
there.
incredible.
Hmm.
Incredible.
They-
And nowhere else have I seen it that it tops what I saw in New York. It was memorable, completely memorable. Loved it.
And I've seen several other shows in that theater. I saw To Kill a Mockingbird, and I saw Matilda in that theater. And every time I walk in that theater, all I can think about is the chorus line.
Oh,
Chorus line theater. It's not the Schubert theater, it's the chorus line theater.
Yeah.
because it held the record for several years, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it did. I
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But I know you are also a self-proclaimed foodie. So what is on the quarantine menu? And are you taking out or are you cooking?
uh, let's see. I got to tell you the story. You know those chicken sales that have been happening?
Ken, are you in line waiting for the chicken at the state? About 40 pounds of chicken in your freezer?
Not just 40, he came home with
Oh
120
my
pounds of chicken.
gosh. Well, what happened was a close friend of mine works at Department of Agriculture. And when the sale was at the fairgrounds, she texts me and says, "Hey, Ken, there are no lines here." And I'd just gotten off the set and I thought, I've got a couple hours to kill. All right, I'll go see what's up. And next thing you know, I've got 120 pounds of chicken and spread over 3 freezers, including my in-laws.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So there's been a lot of chicken on the menu, the quarantine menu.
Amanda, when he came home with 120 pounds of chicken, did you think he had lost his mind?
I kind of did. And it was funny because the first time when they had done it, they did it in Garner, and I went down to get just 40 pounds of chicken. And I packed up a cooler and things, and I was really proud of myself. But I got there about 15 minutes after they had left. but really I was gonna get 40 pounds and that was it. And then he comes home with
Oh
3 times as much.
It was ridiculous.
I mean, and he said, and I really wanted wings, or I really wanted this, and they were already out of it. So instead, I bought these 3 cuts, and I was going, all right, well, we're gonna have a lot of chicken.
So, are you cooking? Do you cook, Ken?
Amanda does most of the cooking, but yeah, I do enjoy cooking every now and then. And she's a good cook. So when I was growing up, I cooked a lot, and when I was in college, I cooked a lot. But now my lovely wife takes good care of us.
I think there needs to be a new WRL segment about what you're doing with all this chicken. I think there needs to be cooking with the Smiths.
Yeah. No. He had some good like island chicken recipes that he likes to do too. So
there'll be quite a few.
He does some of those,
and you know, before the pandemic, we used to go to Cameron Bar and Grill for burger night. Mm-hmm. So we've continued that tradition here at home. So at least one night a week we'll have burger night. So that's been a nice addition to the quarantine menu. And I have a sweet tooth, so there's always something sweet laying around the house. Dessert. I look at the dessert menu first, by the way.
Yeah.
Whenever we go out.
Well, you got to do that.
Oh,
I mean, that's a given.
Absolutely.
We need a good dessert place, I think, right near DPAC, because every time I leave the theater, I don't want to sit in that garage for so long. I just want to go for coffee and dessert. So we need something.
If you ever go to
here, make it happen.
If you ever go to Charleston, South Carolina, you've got to go to a place called Kaminsky's. All they do are desserts and coffee. That's the kind of place we wish we had next to DPAC.
Yeah.
That's all they do, desserts and coffee. It's so good.
That's my
Maybe
kind of
we
place.
can lure Kaminsky's here to Durham.
I know.
Yeah. What is on your pandemic reading list?
Sort of the history.
I'm a huge Doris Kearns Goodwin fan.
Oh, me.
So I just I got her book on Theodore Roosevelt for Christmas from her mom. So I just started that. I'm also reading Defending Jacob, which is I think also
going to be on Apple TV.
It's going to be on Apple TV. So I tend to read several books at a time because when you come home at night, you may not feel like a history book like I'm reading with Theodore Roosevelt. And sometimes I feel like a drama like Defending Jacob. So you read that. Huge James Patterson fan. That's really terrific summer reading for me.
And other than the news, what is on your pandemic watch list? Or do you not watch TV because you're
We're big fans.
We like TV shows.
And we do a lot of the streaming services too. Of course, I just tuned into The Looming Tower with Jeff Daniels. Phenomenal. Very good. Little Fires Everywhere. If you have not seen that on Hulu, you've got to see it. Kerry Washington and Reese Witherspoon are amazing in it. Absolutely amazing in it. And of course, I'm a huge Homeland fan that just wrapped up the 7th and final season the other day. So between that and NCIS and
I like
the dramas.
And then I got him into, my brother and I we started watching, I guess, last year, The Masked Singer on Fox. And it's
so good.
And so it was kind of like a guilty pleasure, like I couldn't believe I was watching it kind of thing, but he made fun of it a little bit. And then he was like, all of a sudden he was into it. And the same thing with I watched Zoe's Playlist, and he listened to an interview with the writer, the creator.
Yeah.
And since it was kind of like looking at life from how his dad actually, like, okay, what if my dad heard things in music? And so when he heard that, and kind of like you were saying with theater, making that personal connection, all of a sudden Ken had this personal connection to the show. So he goes, all right, now I need to go back and watch episode 1 and episode 2. And
Because I came home one night and she was watching Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, and I'm like, whatever. So I pulled up next to her, and I'm like, very cynical watching. And next thing you know, by the end of it, I'm like, oh, that's all right. It's not bad. And then I heard that interview she talked about, and I was like, all right, we got to watch the whole season. So
It
Zoe
is
is
such a
Extraordinary
good
Playlist.
show. My daughter and I binge watched Zoe's.
Oh,
And if you are a musical theater fan and you haven't seen Zoe's Extraordinary,
exactly.
gotta watch it with
I know. And to be honest with you, we weren't ready for the finale. We weren't ready for Dad to die yet. Yeah,
People might not have watched it though, that are
I know.
watching
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Oh,
Yeah, no, the finale was
oh,
gut wrenching, but that
Oh my
show is
God.
so funny,
Yeah.
and then it makes you cry, and then
Yes.
Yeah.
and there are so many good.
And they had Bernadette Peters come guest star. Maybe she'll be in season 2 a little bit more.
yeah. It's so
Peter
good.
Gallagher, who a lot of people, my daughter was like, he was in While You Were Sleeping, but he's a big theater person.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, some really good performances.
And he plays that role so well. I thought maybe he's really incapacitated.
I don't know.
It was phenomenal.
Yeah, he's really good. And his daughter, if you get to New York, you have to see his daughter in Jagged Little Pill. Oh,
Wow.
what a performance. So,
Oh wow.
Amanda, are you watching any live streams of theater?
Let's see. Well, I tuned in that the Globe has released a couple, but now I'm reading a lot about the Globe that it might not reopen, and so that's really sad. And the National Theater, and I've seen bits and pieces from the US theaters that they're going to, I guess, start in June, streaming some things, and then a lot of the local companies are doing kind of like Thursday Night Live pop-ins and things like that. And I join your watch parties a lot.
Oh, good.
Big
Yeah.
fans.
I did the trivia you did, I guess, a couple weeks ago.
We had such a good time doing that.
I realized that I really don't.
To me. I'm leaving
No.
that feedback from now on.
I realized too, though, that I didn't know as much musical theater knowledge as I needed to. I need to go back and take musical theater history again, I think.
Oh, these people are crazy, Amanda. I didn't even, they gave me the answers and I was like, I'm glad I'm not playing because I don't know what you guys are.
We had a
Yeah.
good time. We thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad I got to spend the hour with
No, we did too.
I can't believe it's over already.
I know.
I know. It's a treat. But thank you so much. Ken, stay safe and healthy. I think
You
I'm an
too.
even bigger fan now that I've spoken to the both of you. And,
Thank
we've
you.
just seen each other at the stage door. I haven't really
Yeah.
spoken too much, but I love this. And just stay safe and healthy. Amanda, I appreciate you and all the teachers out there so much.
Oh, thank you, Lauren.
There are superheroes for sure.
You are the unsung heroes of this pandemic. Virtually, we all appreciate teachers much more than we ever did.
And all the best to you and your family too,
I
Mom.
know.
Stay safe.
Thank you, and I will be tuning in. I'm a news junkie, so
Good.
I
Yeah.
will be watching.
Well, we can't wait to see you at the theater. Hopefully sooner rather than later.
And I hope to see you guys at the theater soon. I know you want to get back to it just like I do. So when it's safe, I hope to see you at the stage door.
Yes. I
It's a
know.
date.
Thank you guys. And
you.
everyone come back tomorrow night. I will be with Rachel Clem at 7:30. We will be discussing another show that I love, Head Over Heels. I got to see it in New York. Did you guys see Head Over Heels?
I missed it, but I've listened to the soundtrack.
Oh my gosh, the soundtrack is so good. It's music of the Go-Go's. Not really a jukebox musical. I mean, I guess it falls under that umbrella, but it's really fun and quirky and interesting. So Rachel Clem and I will be talking about it. She's with NC State. And so I hope everyone will come back tomorrow night at 7:30. Thank you, Ken. Stay safe.
You
Now
too.
I'm not going to be able to watch the news. I'll give you like Amanda,
I know.
tell him to come on.
Go.
Oh, thank you, Lauren.
Thank you both so much.
You're welcome.
See you later. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you.